Hi, I'm Tony.
I'm Patrick.
Welcome to Cave to the Cross Apologetics. We are continuing our discussion and study of Mitch Stokes' book, How to Be an Atheist.
That's right.
And we are made our way now to the third section of his book, and we're on chapter 13, where he talks about moral mammals, the evolution of ethics.
Right.
So where did ethics come from? Well, in this chapter, he's going to consider the issue that did we just evolve into good or bad or whatever, right or wrong, or did ethics evolve, right?
We didn't know what to do until Darwin came along.
That's right. All right. So he says, he's concerned with what makes actions right and wrong, obligatory, and given the biological account of morality, he says it's reasonable to ask whether or not biology is all there is to morality, right? And if it is, what does this imply about the authority of our moral beliefs, if anything? Right? In other words, if they're based on biology, okay, what about why are they authoritative? Right? Why do we have to follow our biology, or not?
Right. Yeah.
He begins this section by talking about E.O. Wilson, the famed social biologist, who wrote about how biology and sociology kind of evolved, right? The evolution of our various behaviors, right? Before then, folks, obviously features evolved is what folks said, but behaviors seem to be something else is going on.
Right.
But Wilson kind of connected evolution with our particular social behavior, right? And so he says the general picture here is that our moral beliefs have been fashioned over time to help us survive. Ethical behavior tends to keep us alive long enough to produce the next generation. So that's the basic idea here. There was controversy at the time, when E.O. Wilson put his book out, but now it's pretty much a given deal.
Yeah. It's just about finding that explanation that you can tie with something to prehistoric man. So, the example I always bring up is, you're taking a walk out in nature and you hear rustling over in the cornfield or whatnot, and you see the corn stalks move. Well, your prehistoric man has passed you through the ages, DNA strand, that this gene kicks on and says, oh, there's probably a snake there, so I should fear rustling. And so those who developed this fear gene passed it on because they were able to fear off the snake. They could run away or to grab it out of midair because they were that much more manly than I am. Yeah. But now, it's just, you're running from the deer or whatever, but it's still protecting you. It's adding to your survival. So, if you hear a sudden noise, back then it was a coyote in the woods that was coming to drag you and your young off. Well, now it's a car that's passing you by that you're moving over a little bit more because, grandma's out there with her bifocals off.
I would think some of my kids may have missed that gene because oftentimes when they hear rustles, they go forward when they were kids, but young kids, because they wanted to know what it was all about,
So we evolved in different species forms, and right. Yeah.
So this has become common fare, he says. He quotes Peter Singer here. He says, this provides empirical support for the idea that, like other psychological faculties of the mind, including language and math, we are endowed with a moral faculty that guides our intuitive judgments of right and wrong, interacting in interesting ways with the local culture. These intuitions reflect the outcome of millions of years in which our ancestors have lived as social mammals and are part of our common inheritance as much as our opposable thumbs are.
Yeah.
Right? So there it is. It's all in the genes.
Right. So nothing's right or wrong. It's does this add to survival? And we can make those determinations based on probably what we consider good at the time, except when times change, what do we do with that? And so we'll get into that a little bit later in this chapter.
So what do we do with what seems to be anti-survival behavior?
Yeah, right. Don't we engage in behavior that is terrible? Like, how about war? Hey, random person, go out and fight for your country and protect other people that you've never met, or go across the seas and protect this town because you're ordered to. Yeah. Well, that doesn't seem very survival to us. Or you you have your child and you sacrifice your sleep and energy and time and money, all the things that you could be using to feed yourself, you're doing for another being. That seems anti-you.
Yeah, anti-self-interest, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, anti-survival interest.
Right.
Right. And here's another one that he talks about in terms of anti-survival behavior.
Right. Yeah, altruism.
Altruism.
Yeah, altruism. Giving money to the poor. We shouldn't do that, right? Because that's helping other people. The good news is we do actually see this in nature, and we see it as the symbiosis. So think of like the fish that go around sharks and clean them up. The sharks don't eat them; they get a source of food. Sharks get taken care of; all the bacteria go off.
Playing good together.
Yeah, right. Yeah, even the mean old sharks. Bees and flowers. I guess flowers didn't exist before bees, and so they had to evolve.
Which came first, the bee or the flower?
Exactly. There you go. So societies and their necessary moral norms are far more conducive to preserving our genes than a life lived in total isolation. So the idea is that those of us who are more sympathetic to other people, more altruistic, kind of form this community bond, kind of almost a social contract. Although I don't believe in the social contract, it forms this type of societal, milieu that brings us together, and so we're more apt to protect other people. They're more apt to protect us, and the group, in whatever denomination you draw your circle around, survives that way.
Right. So cooperation drives altruism.
Right. Yeah.
So and we have evolved and understand that cooperation allows for better survival.
Right. And then altruism among family members is another thing. It seems odd that we want to protect our children, except for the very fact that also ingrained in us is this innate sense to continue the species, and especially continue not only the species, but our distinct DNA line. That seems because, our ancestors, those that didn't have that desire, died off because you wouldn't see them today. And so over millions of years, those same type of people either died off because they didn't produce their DNA down the family tree, or those that did continued on. And so that gene, wherever it might be, has developed, and so much so that it seems almost worldwide now.
Right. So he makes the point that altruism then is really selfishness.
Right. Yeah. It's just one more tool for our survival. So we don't, even though we might have a consciousness of, I might die, I care about me in other people or in other things. So by helping my neighbor save their child from getting struck by a car, I hope that they would do it for mine, and in doing so, continue my DNA strand down through the ages, which I don't know why that affects me, but other than
why should I care? But,
yeah.
So he makes the point here that it kind of twists around our usual explanation of altruism, right? I mean, altruism is done. We help others for our own selfish reasons, and that's that's kind of odd.
Yeah, but we get close to Ayn Rand's objectivism and selfishness. Selfishness is a virtue. So we're all slowly becoming libertarians this way, right? So the person that really kind of hones this a lot, and we'll cover in both this chapter and the next chapter, is Sam Harris. We've talked about Sam Harris before, pretty well known in the atheist circles, and by his own means is a very thoughtful person, and puts forth a lot of ideas, and has a good podcast that people should check out if they're interested in the topics he covers. So then the question is, well, okay, so we're continuing our gene pool, and so does that mean that we then become kind of puppets of our DNA, of our own emotion? So that's what he covers next.
Yeah. So are we puppets of what we're supposed to do? He says, on a purely evolutionary story, our moral judgments may merely be the result of biological processes, right? Like sex drives and hunger and so forth. He says, our urge to visit Hawaii in January.
Yes.
Yeah. He says, here we stand, we can do no other. So as Hume would say, nature is too strong for us, right? Although there's plenty of evidence that this is not at all true, we're pretty good at overpowering our altruistic urges,
Yeah.
right?
Because again, this seems like it's not like gravity. You know, no matter how high you jump, you can't fly. No matter how hard you think, you can't, unless you're in Star Trek, the four lights don't magically become five. There doesn't seem to be any other area except this one area that seems to be so ingrained that we can outdo our own survival mechanisms in order to do something.
Right. In fact, that's what he covers next. He says, being the puppets of our emotion is troubling enough, but there's something else. Our moral judgments were selected for long ago.
Very
right?
long ago.
Yeah. And for situations that are totally removed.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And so today, these judgments often put us in situations that aren't beneficial for us. Right. Adopting a child, or having sex with someone outside who was on the pill. Well, how does that help my survival, right? So he says, notice, he says, when we sacrifice our well-being for those who can't return the favor or who don't share our blood, we're really being tricked by our biology. That's how they have to explain it, right? He mentions Dawkins here that says Richard Dawkins calls these erroneous urges misfiring.
Yeah, right.
Right, so they're misfiring. So we have misfire. So it's just a glitch in the system.
Right. Well, I mean, evolution doesn't produce perfect things, and we're all mutations of some kind. So we just have these misfirings.
Yeah. So we do these things, and although we shouldn't do them because they don't help survival, but we do them anyway. And oops, right?
Although
get it right.
Yeah. I mean, shouldn't we evolve? A sense of passing down knowledge through our DNA too. That would be beneficial. We're not spending precious resources relearning and teaching, or why can't we evolve to a higher level of brain density where we can move things with our mind, or is that where we're going?
Yeah,
or,
I mean, I'm sure there are folks that believe that's where we're headed. Right?
Yeah, I mean, that's what all the outer limits say. That the person who accidentally steps forward in time 3,000 years comes back and his brain is pulsating, and he's evolved past you mere mortal men.
Right. So he says it seems plausible here that evolution has simply programmed us. That's kind of an interesting thing. Programmed us to mistakenly believe in moral realism. So moral realism is the idea that moral truths, moral judgments really do exist, right? There really is something that is right and wrong, right? Just as long as we live long enough to add our DNA to the gene pool, right, is what he says. So moral realism, but is a mistake, is what Joshua Green, he quotes here, says, and because there is no real ethics, right? Real morality. It's just what we have been programmed to believe.
Right. So there's nothing out in nature. It's not a product of the universe. There's no God that has declared it. The only question that I have is, okay, if this is a mistake, if this just adds to our survival, what other processes has evolution imbued upon us that are wrong that we think are right?
Yeah.
How about the scientific process? Okay, well, we just see the repetition of, boiling the water to 100 degrees, but nothing's actually happening there. We do need to eat, and so we just need to eat the pasta that's what we think is cooked, but really it's not cooked. So what you might see as boiling water that you put the pasta in just turns out to be, crunchy old pasta that your mind plays a trick on you to make you eat and consume calories so that you can survive.
Yeah. Could be, right?
Right.
He talks about how, in the mid 20th century, this issue with regard to moral realism and that sort of thing, how to get objective morality, was debated. He says, but since it has received less attention, and he says this is not because it's been solved or because agreement has been reached. Instead, it seems that they just kind of shelved it. Right?
Yeah, there's this kind of little thing called World War II that really put a hamper on things, and then also made us question humanity and where we were at as a world species and stuff like that. So, yeah, that tends to put a hamper on things.
Right. So he says, nor is it that people no longer argue over what sorts of actions are right and wrong. This too seems to be something we can't help. But the question, who says, right, or by what standard, must come back again into the limelight. All other ethical questions are secondary. By what standard? What's the standard that determines that, right? And so he says that is the key question
Right.
with regard to this.
Which is kind of the thing that we say too, right?
Yeah.
Sure, all these things may be beneficial, but at the same time, there are other competing ideas that may not be beneficial, but it seems like we do. So which path do we take? What should our biology dictate? Well, that's kind of up for debate. So, you have the social biologist who says, run from the snake, and then you have the other social biologist who says, no, you must overcome and overtake your natural surroundings and own it.
Yeah,
So
own the snake.
Yeah, leap in there. Well, which one is it then?
So how did the leopard get his
Right. So he says.
So this is the next section. Right?
Yes. Social biologist. It's no wonder Mitch Stokes wants to put forth the possibility that the social biologists have their facts wrong. It's a legitimate possibility, however. The worry being that the words of atheist philosopher Philip Kitcher says evolutionary explanations run the risk of becoming exercises in storytelling, just without Kipling's wit. So he says that it's the possibility that we're not reconstructing actual history of ethical projects, but that we're forming what we believe it is beyond the available evidence. We cannot advertise explanations of how actually these processes occurred, but this is a possibility, and we should agree on it.
Yeah, obviously we can't go back and observe, right?
Yeah, right. So our snake in the grass thing, I have a fright because of the thing moving. Well, what if it wasn't snake in the grass? What if it's, there was always, another tribe person that was with us who was becoming a snake god, and so we evolved this jump process because we were actually communing with this snake god that our fellow tribesman was imitating. So that's where it comes from. Well, then you have two competing ideas where you just are kind of assuming where that came from. There's no testing of that. Unless you hop in your time machine or you go back. This has always been what creationists have always had a issue with when it comes to evolution, is the whole you weren't there. We're not doing observable science. We're doing historical science. We're applying what we believe to happen. We don't really know. We kind of tweak our theory, and so that's why you still have the Big Bang being a theory. And so here's why we get the redshift, and here's why we get galaxies spinning in different directions. But we're not doing what Hume would want us to do.
And as a result, it's really difficult to overcome our assumptions about what we think, this is the way it is, right. And now let's talk about it. So I think Kitcher, has his finger on the nail here. It's somewhat storytelling, right?
Right.
How do we tells the best story?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, the guy in the lab coat seems to really press his lab coat, so we should listen to him rather than the guy with the collar around his neck.
That's right. Or the bow tie.
Or the bow tie. Yes. So he goes on to say, I myself am very skeptical about the evolutionary explanation, as we talked about in previous chapters. It does. There's no doubt that our moral code provides survival advantage over many of the alternatives, because, of course, it does. But biological benefit does not in itself imply that our ethics develop naturalistically. It may be, for example, that a divine lawgiver hardwired us with knowledge of these moral laws, and one of the benefits of following them is things will generally go better for us as well as for others.
Right. So there's we can have a couple of explanations with regard to programming. If that's what it is, right?
Right.
They say evolution programmed us, but he's suggesting, well, what about a divine lawgiver? A divine lawgiver could have programmed us, right, to accept these things, and believe them.
And so where we've talked about compatibilism as it relates to free will, Sam Harris is a determinist as far as free will goes, and he follows that from his line of thinking as far as his idea of what evolutionary process happens, and as what the social biology does.
So his behaviors are unavoidable. He can't help do what he does if he's a determinist.
Right. And so I guess everything that he does, like start a podcast and try and help people learn, that's just what is programmed into him by his biology. And he doesn't really
The
get
laws
any
of nature
Yeah.
working, right? And so no matter what you do, you can always say, Your Honor, the laws of nature made me do it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So what is punishment? Why are we punishing if we're trying to curb behavior, right? That's what we do when we punish is we have both a generic and a specific type of deterrent. The specific deterrent is stop that person from doing that thing again. So we put them in prison, or we put a fine on them, or we kill them. And then
and we're also trying to keep other people. I mean, we're
the general deterrent. We put it out there and we say, people shouldn't do this because this will happen to you. Yeah. And so, if we're all just determined to do what we want, what is that sense of justice?
And right. And the sense of justice might mean even something like, I want revenge, because of what they did to me. That kind of stuff.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So naturalism implies nihilism, and since that's what I think the evolutionary story of ethics implies. So we're still stuck with no objective morality, but this sense of kind of blasé when it comes to morality, that there's no oughts or shoulds, and he'll cover that a little bit in the next chapter as well.
Yeah. So his next section, he asked the question, could our sentiments about morality be correct? He says, is it possible that our biological conditioned moral feelings are accurate? Might they identify or align with genuine moral standards out there in the world?
Yeah, by accident or by design.
Yeah.
Design within evolution, not through, all-purpose creator, big C.
Right. After all, we believe that our mental states, right, correctly portray the mind-independent world. So maybe our moral states do that too. They could be correct. And he says this is certainly possible, but there's no real evolutionary explanation for its accuracy. That is, evolutionary accounts don't require an external standard to make sense. All they require is survival value.
Right.
So evolution doesn't require our moral beliefs to be true or accurate, right? All it's looking for, if we can put it like that, is survival value.
Right. And we looked at this in the last section as it goes to science. Why should we expect to come to knowledge of anything that is Big Bang or nebulas or speed of light? How does that add to our survival? Well, it doesn't. So, it seems like it has no. There's no sense for us to take this as true belief, because it doesn't add to our survival. So we're just kind of looking at the shadows on the wall, and we're coming up with stories.
Yeah.
And these just seem to be more, bombastic stories rather than, little gods trying to trick you. It's, the Big Bang.
Right. Yeah. So he quotes Thomas Nagel. With regard to this, he says, from a Darwinian perspective, the hypothesis of value realism is superfluous. It's a wheel that spins without being attached to anything. Right? So it's just a spinning wheel. That is, moral beliefs, which are grounded in feelings, sentiments, Hume, are all that we need to account for the survival benefits that morality provides. Whereas a perceptual belief that there's an oncoming traffic requires that there also be no oncoming traffic, right? And so, perceptual beliefs seem to be different, right? Because you can get into serious physical, trouble.
Yeah, if you didn't believe that the traffic was there and you cross the street, you'd still be hit by a car, I guess theoretically, unless if, you become a super Buddhist or something like that. But when it comes to, should I steal the candy from the gas station? Well, there's nothing that, hits you like a truck,
Right.
other than the security guy at the end or the police officer.
So the issue here then is that moral realism, not to say, he says, that's not to say that moral realism is false, but merely that it's not needed to explain the usefulness of our moral beliefs. So we saw this earlier when he was talking about making this distinction between in science, right? Where do the entities that we posit in science, are they real, or are they just useful fictions, right? So he's making the same kind of issue here, right? As long as it's useful, then it's okay, but it doesn't track with truth,
Mm-hmm.
right, and accuracy. Yeah. And so he says, notice that this is much more plausible to think that our moral beliefs gloom on to some objective moral reality if theism is true, right? That is, he says, this is taken by some to suggest, and him included, that God has designed us with a cognitive faculty, a belief-forming mechanism that reliably recognizes his moral values. At least it was reliable prior to the human fall into sin. Right? So theism gives us another explanation about what's going on.
Right.
That may allow it for truth and accuracy and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So again, it comes down to surprise, surprise worldviews and how you look at things through and what you accept as truth. If you don't accept truth from a deity, then the second version that Dr. Stokes provides is you're not even going to consider it because you know or you don't take into fact that God exists. So, what good does that do you? So then what we have to do is the don't answer. So we gave an answer. People didn't like it. So, okay, let's look at what they postulate. And so he says that there's a couple problems with how this current evolutionary picture of morality is. And the first one is that objective moral standards would perform no explanatory work when it comes to our moral beliefs.
Right. So they don't help us in terms of explaining why we behave the way we do. Right. That is, even if they are objective, it doesn't make any difference because we have a different explanation, which is the evolutionary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The very fact that a God explanation exists kind of denotes that, well, okay, if it's out there, if it's objective, we don't really know about it.
Right.
Yeah.
And so evolution doesn't help us with regard to that explanation he's suggesting.
Mm-hmm. So the second problem is, I think the really punch in the gut here is that with the evolutionary account is that our moral beliefs evolved. That's what happened. If these beliefs have evolved, might not they continue to do so as humans adapt to different environments? It seems the height of arrogance, or at least an impressive lack of imagination, to think that we've arrived at a final internal ethical code.
This is it, right?
Right. So, back in the day...
Doesn't get any better than
Yes.
this.
Back in the day, we killed each other in our tribes, and now we call them cities, and we just sue each other. Yeah. So, is this the best it's gotten, or will we, as we've seen in 100 different dystopian movies, will we set up a game show where we pit people against each other in order to fight to the death, in order to gain the prize, or whatever.
And entertain the masses.
It's good. The circus is there, or the idea that slavery, we however collectively you want to take that, viewed slavery as a good thing, and then we evolved out of it, whatever that means.
Right.
We just suddenly viewed it as not good. Why? Well, because our evolution, I guess, has caused us to make us believe that this will help us to survive more. I don't know. I don't know the explanation other than it hurts people and therefore you add more people to your tribe that will want to help you, maybe something along those lines. But could we ever evolve backwards and say, well, it was fine when the population of the world was 7 billion, but once it reached 10 billion, we kind of had to go back to slavery because we were running out of jobs and we needed to stick people in smaller menial ones, and we couldn't really pay them because of how many people there were. So,
and it adds to our survival, and therefore
right, the more slaves I have, the more I survive, the more I can pass down my lineage to my children. So, or what we're always worried about now is AI overtaking us. In fact, there's a lot of people that view and prominent scientists who I've listened to talk say that our evolution has stopped kind of biologically. We still evolve here and there, but our big steps in evolution are our technology. So we extend our biology to our technology, and it's through this. And so then we're worried about AI taking over and automation doing away with jobs, even though we haven't really cared about that when the car came over to take out the horses, those poor horses, but yet we still have horses. So there are it seems like if we say we're right now, well, what does that mean 100 years into the future? Because us saying we're right now is at the same principle that people in before 1850 said we're right now, and
we're correct
yeah,
now.
yeah. And I think we're struggling with that as a society right now, in that by who says, by what standard are we to judge? Who are you to say that I can't do something, or I can't,
or that this now we've reached the supreme status in terms of what ethics is all about.
Right. We've come to the answer, and it's 42.
So, so the issue I think he's trying to get at here is really all we can say is, and we have to ask the question: has it gotten any better? Is it getting better, or is it just change?
Right.
And because if there's if it's the purpose is just for survival value, then what makes it better is survival value, right? Not that we're getting closer to the truth, or that we're getting any better,
or we're hurting less people.
Right.
None of that matters.
We change; it changes so that we can survive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but who survives?
Yeah.
That, which part of us? It's like in the time machine where you have, and I always forget both the Morlocks and the good ones, the ones we're supposed to identify with.
Right.
They evolved two separate species, or you have invasion of the mole people. You have the mole people who become slaves and they rise up against their masters who can't take the sunlight because they've been separated from society. So where is this division line? Because it seems like we're no longer the two tribes of prehistoric ape people that, in 2001: A Space Odyssey, find the bone and realize that they've made a tool to use for killing. At what point are we going to say then that people in the first world are more evolved than people in the third world? It seems like that would be problematic today.
Yeah,
but at what point does a delineation occur? Hauser and Singer go on to say that not only does morality evolve, but we don't need to wait for generations of biological adaptations now. We can go ahead and choose a morality that fits our current need. Which seems odd, because could we have done that at another point? Yeah. When could we have not done that? Once we realize that we are products of evolution?
Right. So notice what they're saying. They're saying that morality is just whatever we choose.
Right. I mean, that's the big thing too. Right. Yeah. Yes. You look now. I'm talking historically, and so yes. I choose that. I really want my neighborhood to be the safest way possible, and I only want to go out and rape and pillage other communities so that I can bring it in. I want to bring Viking, belief back, and whatever you kill, you keep. Chronicles of Riddick type deal. He goes on to say that insights into the changing moral landscape have not come from religion, but from careful reflection on humanity, of what we consider a well-lived life. This is Hauser and Singer. Right. In this respect, it's important for us to be aware of the universal set of moral institutions so that we can reflect on them, and if we choose act contrary to them, we can do this without blasphemy, because it's in our own nature, not God, that is the source of our own species morality. And then you just say, okay, that's what you believe.
Right. That's what you chose to do.
Yeah,
right.
But I believe different. So people come to opposite conclusions, and sometimes it's that there's no act on our survival. So times change, and so do our moral beliefs. Why do they think they'll ever stop? And what does that mean to stop? Why think they are getting closer to moral truth? We can certainly say that we like our current set of ethical standards better than our previous ones, but can we ever say that they're objectively better? Right. And here's a big one. By what standard would we measure this?
Exactly.
Or what does best mean, or what we believe now? Is that what we're
going to make? Yeah, if you're going to make a claim about best or better, you better than what? You have to have a standard.
And the one that I see online the most when interacting with atheists or people who don't subscribe to my standard is, well, it's whatever helps the most amount of people.
That's a utilitarian.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But, in what capacity, in what form, what happens when, you have the trolley problem. Well, I step away because it doesn't add to my survival. I don't care. Other than I probably will stop getting paid for switching the tracks. According to evolutionary story, our moral beliefs are merely survival tools, not apprehending truth, eternal truth especially. It's plausible that certain currently untoward behaviors aid to our survival. Rape, aggression, xenophobia, and male promiscuity. These are not only natural, but arguably advantageous. Yet they are now offensive to us, which I think is pretty important to say. So what standard do we choose? Again, why can't I suddenly say, if I'm able to recognize my evolutionary ancestors, men were more aggressive back then and we survived, and we had nothing back then, so we should become Luddites and we should become misogynistic and we should become, flesh eaters and going out there and raping and pillaging, and that's the easiest way, because even death, we can take the Klingon stance of death in battle is honor, because you've fought valiantly for your tribe, and your children will see that and they'll become stronger warriors as opposed to you who have died in battle, kind of deal.
Yeah.
Why is that any different than I should go across the street and
the issue
bake a
is
pie?
if indeed it's just a choice, whose choice, who gets to make the choice, and I think I want to be in on that.
Right, yeah. Welcome to our society.
Yeah.
Yes. The Klingon battle.
So his last section here in this chapter talks about what should a poor primate do, right? He says a common charge level at naturalists is that since behavior like rape and aggression aid in our survival, evolution implies that we ought to behave in these ways, right? In other words, we ought to do whatever is natural, right? So the survival of the fittest, Spencer proclaimed, is not just Mother Nature's way, but it's the way we ought to behave.
Ooh, so there's our ought, right?
Yeah, there's our ought, right? It's so we smuggle it in with regard to with regard to nature. He says, of course, this has been picked up on by those who oppose naturalism. And he quotes William Lane Craig here. He says, and I'm going to go ahead and read this quote because this is kind of interesting. If life ends at the grave, then it makes no difference whether one has lived as Stalin or as a saint. Since one's destiny is ultimately unrelated to one's savior, you may as well live as you please. On this basis, a writer like Ayn Rand is absolutely correct to praise the virtues of selfishness. Live totally for yourself. No one holds you accountable. Indeed, it would be foolish to do anything else, for life is too short to jeopardize it by acting out of anything but pure self-interest. Sacrifice for another person would be stupid.
Yeah. So, you can take this any way depending on who you're talking to. Why should we follow monogamy? Well, monogamy adds a stable relationship. They're more apt to take care of your progeny, and you share resources. Okay, well, but why should I be promiscuous? Well, then you spread more of your seed around, and you have more people to take care of your progeny. If one dies, it's not like you're taking to one. If your concubine is unable to bear children for you, then you have other options. So again, it's about storytelling. It's about which one do you believe, and you can take it. And it seems to be whatever the case of what the current morality is, we look back and read into it. So when people were wanting to be promiscuous, sex and free love, that was a claim that they could make. Well, it's just a product of our evolution. That's what our animal ancestors did. That's what you see in apes. In fact, apes go around and they kill the young from the males that they took over and kicked out of the tribe. So we should do that too.
Yeah, animal ethics.
Yeah.
Why not? That's part of nature.
Right.
And so he points out the problem here, right? He says, I don't see, at least not simply by virtue of the fact that selfish acts gives us reproductive advantage here. Nature means neither good nor ought.
Right.
Many natural things are quite bad, as Dennett points out. Right. It's equally natural to die young and illiterate without benefit of eyeglasses for myopia or medicine for illness. Naturalness alone isn't an indicator of what we ought to value. Right. That's the issue. Why value that? It's not an indicator. The other issue he makes with this is that, notice, nothing, however, in evolution says that you ought to value your own survival above everything else.
Right.
Right? It doesn't say that. It says that's what we do, but it doesn't say we ought to do it. There is no morals with regard to that, right? He says you can derive meaning, purpose, or ethics from evolution. Can you? How can you? He quotes Jerry Cohen here. You can't, Cohen says. Evolution is simply a theory about the process and patterns of life's diversification, not a grand philosophical scheme about the meaning of life. It can't tell us what to do or how we should behave.
Right.
Right? So where are we?
We're at a crossroads.
Yeah.
Because now we have to figure out where we stand at with morality.
Right. So the next chapter, he's going to talk about a way that naturalists attempt to support their particular position.
Right. So that's what we'll do next week. And thanks for joining us. And we'll see you next time.
See you next time.